Derek Lawson stood before the towering glass facade of Lawson Realty Group, the company he had built from the ground up. It was a symbol of his success, an empire that bore his name, yet he felt like a stranger at its doors. The reports had been coming in for months, whispers of a toxic culture, of employees denied opportunities, of deals unfairly distributed. He had dismissed them at first, unwilling to believe that the firm he had nurtured had rotted at its core. But the evidence was undeniable. If he were to fix this, he needed to see it for himself. Not as the CEO, not as Derek Lawson, the man who commanded respect the moment he entered a room, but as an outsider, as someone they wouldn't think twice about mistreating. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, transformed. His usual sharp suit was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting, off-the-rack blazer and scuffed shoes. His signature tailored haircut had been grown out, his beard shaved down to uneven stubble. He had aged himself slightly, added a bit of weight around his midsection, softened his posture. The polished executive had been stripped away. In his place stood David Lewis, just another man looking for a job. The moment he stepped inside, the air shifted. No warm greetings. No eager handshakes. Just indifference. At the front desk, the receptionist, a young woman with sleek hair and perfectly manicured nails, barely glanced up from her phone. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat. "Yes, I'm here for an interview." David Lewis. Her gaze flicked to him, then back to her screen. A long pause stretched between them before she sighed and gestured vaguely. "Take a seat. Someone will get you." He took a chair near the corner, observing everything. Employees passed without acknowledgement, their conversations flowing around him as if he were invisible. He had spent years building a company that prided itself on professionalism, yet here he was, treated like an afterthought, before even stepping through the door. When Mark Benson, the HR manager, finally arrived, Derek knew in an instant the kind of man he was dealing with. Benson's handshake was weak, his smile forced. He led Derek into a sterile conference room, flipping through the resume that had been carefully crafted to be solid, but unimpressive. "So, David," Benson leaned back in his chair, glancing at the paper as if struggling to find something worth commenting on. "You've got experience in real estate, but not much on the high-end side. We deal with elite clients here. You sure you're a good fit?" Derek recognized the test for what it was. A polite way of saying, "You don't belong here." "I've worked in sales for over a decade," he replied evenly. "Adaptability is part of the job." Benson smirked, tapping the resume with his pen. "Right, but we're talking about a certain level of clientele. People who expect refinement." Derek kept his expression neutral. "I understand professionalism, if that's what you mean." Benson's smile widened, insincere. "Of course. Let's just see how you do. We'll start you on probation under James Coyle. He runs one of our top-performing teams." James Coyle. Derek knew the name well. He had read the reports, heard the complaints. But here was Benson, assigning him to the man known for running his team like an exclusive club. Derek shook Benson's hand, feeling the judgment in his grip. "We'll be in touch," Benson said, already looking past him. The next morning, Derek arrived for his first day. The moment he entered the bullpen, he could feel the hierarchy in place. The sleek glass desks, the expensive suits, the whispered conversations. It was a well-oiled machine, but one designed to keep certain people in power. James Coyle leaned against his desk, his tailored suit crisp, his expression unreadable. His eyes flicked over Derek, quick and assessing. "You must be the new guy," he said, barely masking his lack of enthusiasm. "David, right?" "That's me." James didn't offer his hand. Instead, he gestured toward a desk in the corner, isolated from the rest. "That's yours. For now." Derek took his seat, noting the way the other employees barely acknowledged him. James continued, his voice carrying just enough authority to make it clear that he was in charge. "Here's how it works. You don't get leads handed to you. You earn them. We deal with high-value clients, and I don't have time to babysit." Derek nodded, knowing better than to challenge him too soon. Understood? For the next few hours, he watched, listened. Every interaction confirmed what he had suspected. Deals were being funneled to certain employees, those who fit the mold. The unspoken rule was clear. If you didn't match their image, you weren't worth their time. Midway through the day, a potential client called. Derek, closest to the phone, instinctively answered. "This is David. How can I?" James snatched the receiver from his hand before he could finish. "Sorry about that," he said smoothly into the line, his voice shifting to a polished charm. James Coyle speaking. "How can I assist?" Derek watched, silent. He wasn't surprised. Not yet angry. Just taking note. When lunch rolled around, he walked past the break room and caught snippets of conversation. Laughter. A joke about how some people just don't fit in here. He recognized the tone, the coded language. By the time the day ended, he had seen enough to confirm his worst fears. The culture at Lawson Realty Group was not one of merit. It was one of exclusion, of quiet, insidious discrimination hidden beneath a veneer of professionalism. As he left for the night, stepping out into the cool evening air, he didn't feel anger. Not yet. That would come soon enough. Derek arrived early the next morning, but it didn't matter. His desk, isolated in the corner, felt even smaller now. No greetings, no acknowledgement. The office buzzed with conversations, the clinking of coffee cups, the murmur of deals being closed, but none of it reached him. He had never been invisible before, not in any room, not in any position, but here, stripped of his title, he was nothing more than an afterthought. James Coyle didn't even glance at him when he walked in, too busy laughing at something one of his associates had said. Derek logged into his system, reviewing the client list he had been given, if it could even be called that. The names were a joke. Dead leads, people who had either gone with another firm or had no intention of buying. Meanwhile, the newer, more polished hires received exclusive clients, ones who were ready to invest. The disparity was obvious. "Got a problem, rookie?" James' voice cut through Derek's thoughts. He turned to see his so-called supervisor leaning against his desk, sipping from an overpriced espresso. Derek kept his expression neutral. "Just looking over the leads." James smirked. "Yeah, well, don't expect much. These kinds of deals require finesse, experience. Not just enthusiasm." It was a careful insult, deliberate in its condescension. Derek nodded, swallowing the retort that wanted to rise. He wasn't here to argue. Not yet. As the day stretched on, the pattern became clearer. Every time he tried to assert himself, he was blocked. He would reach for the phone, only for someone else to cut in and take the call. He asked for clarification on certain procedures, only to be met with sighs and dismissive shrugs. By noon, he decided to push back. A new client walked in, a well-dressed woman with the air of someone looking to make a serious investment. She hesitated at the reception desk, scanning the office. Derek stood and approached before anyone else could. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you?" Before the woman could respond, James materialized at Derek's side, his hand landing on his shoulder with just a bit too much force. "Actually, I'll take it from here," James said smoothly, stepping between them. He turned to the client, flashing a calculated smile. "Apologies for the confusion. Let's get you set up with the right person." The woman looked between them, slightly confused but nodded. Derek stood frozen for a second, every instinct in him screaming to call James out. But instead, he sat back down, watching as James led her into a glass-paneled office, laughing at some joke before the door even closed. The humiliation settled deep. Not just the exclusion, but the ease of it. The way James didn't even consider him worthy of handling a client. The way no one else in the office seemed to notice or care. The next few days followed the same pattern. Every task he was given felt more like a test, an obstacle placed in front of him just to watch him stumble. If he spoke up in meetings, James would cut him off, redirecting the conversation as if Derek's words held no weight. When he tried to network during lunch, the others shifted their conversations the moment he joined. The message was clear. You do not belong here. It wasn't just James. The receptionist, Kendra, constantly forgot to forward important emails to him, resulting in missed opportunities. When he brought it up, she rolled her eyes. Must have slipped my mind, she said without a hint of sincerity. I'll try to be more careful. Mark Benson, the HR manager, wasn't any better. When Derek requested access to certain training materials, Mark gave a drawn-out sigh before saying, Look, David, let's be honest. Not everyone is cut out for this. Some people just don't have the temperament. Temperament. Another carefully chosen word. Derek had spent years in rooms full of men like this. Men who never said the quiet part out loud, who coded their bias in professionalism and plausible deniability. He knew their language, the way they weaponized policy and procedure to keep people like him on the outside. But knowing it didn't make it any easier to swallow. It all came to a head at a high-profile networking event. The company had invited a select number of elite investors, and Derek saw it as an opportunity. If he could prove himself in front of potential clients, they'd have no choice but to take him seriously. The event was held in a private lounge, the kind with dim lighting, polished marble floors, and waiters gliding between groups with trays of champagne. Derek dressed for the occasion, his suit crisp, his posture composed. He didn't look like the rookie they had been treating him as. He looked like what he was, the man who built this empire. He spotted a potential investor, an older gentleman examining one of the company's latest real estate portfolios. Taking a deep breath, Derek stepped forward. Evening, sir. I'd love to walk you through that property. It's one of our strongest investment opportunities right now. The man turned intrigued. Oh? Tell me more. Derek started explaining, his confidence returning. But before he could get through his pitch, James appeared. Apologies for the confusion, James said, stepping between them just as he had before. David here is still new. Let me take over. Derek stiffened. I was handling it. James let out a low chuckle. No offense, man. I just don't want you to get in over your head. The investor, now uncertain, nodded politely as James continued the conversation, as if Derek had never spoken. And just like that, he was erased. Derek turned, scanning the room. Mark Benson was laughing with other executives, completely unbothered. Kendra was in the corner, sipping champagne, ignoring his presence entirely. The entire company was operating exactly as it had before. They hadn't just dismissed him. They had dehumanized him, reduced him to someone beneath notice. And for the first time since stepping into this undercover role, rage burned through him. Not because he had been humiliated, but because this was his company. They had built a culture where they could look a man like him in the eyes and see nothing at all. That was about to change. The morning after the networking event, Derek Lawson walked into the office, but this time, he wasn't David Lewis. He was the CEO. No more slumped shoulders, no more passive acceptance of their treatment. His stride carried weight, his presence demanded attention. And yet, as he stepped through the doors of his company, the receptionist barely glanced up. "Can I help you?" Kendra asked, disinterested as ever. Derek studied her for a moment, then smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "No, Kendra, but I'll be helping you soon enough." She blinked, confused, but before she could respond, he was already moving. Inside the bullpen, employees bustled about, oblivious to the storm about to hit. James Coyle stood near the coffee machine, laughing with a few associates, confident as ever. When Derek approached, James barely spared him a glance. "Oh, look who's still here," James said, shaking his head. "Gotta say, man, I admire the persistence. Most people know when they're out of their league." Derek chuckled. "And you? Do you know when you're out of yours?" James frowned, the playful arrogance slipping for the first time. "What?" Derek didn't answer. Instead, he turned, walking past the bullpen and straight toward the executive conference room, where the real power sat. The glass walls gave him a clear view of Mark Benson and the other senior executives, deep in conversation, completely unaware of what was coming. The moment he pushed open the door, the room fell silent. Benson looked up, irritated. "Excuse me, this is a private meeting." Derek pulled out a chair and sat down at the head of the table. His table. "No, Mark," he said, his voice smooth, unwavering. "This is my meeting." The silence stretched. Confusion flickered across their faces. Then disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about?" Benson scoffed. Derek leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "I'm talking about the fact that, for the past week, I've been working in my own company, watching every single one of you prove exactly why we have a problem." Recognition dawned, slow and terrible. Benson's face paled. One of the executives coughed awkwardly. The others exchanged wary glances, scrambling to process what they had just walked into. Derek let the weight of the moment settle before speaking again. "I built this company from nothing," he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "I put my name on the line, invested my blood, sweat, and years into it. And yet, when I walked through these doors under a different name, I was treated like I didn't belong. Like I wasn't worth the time of day." Benson's mouth opened, but Derek raised a hand, silencing him. "Don't." His tone was sharper now. "I've seen enough. I've heard enough. And I have evidence to back up every claim of discrimination, gatekeeping, and unethical business practices happening under my roof." The room tensed. "James Coyle," Derek continued, turning toward the glass wall where the man himself stood frozen outside, watching the scene unfold. "Why don't you come in?" James hesitated. For the first time since Derek had met him, the man looked uncertain. "I said come in," Derek repeated, his voice brooking no argument. James entered slowly, his usual arrogance stripped away. He glanced at Benson for some kind of reassurance, but the HR manager looked just as lost. Derek stood, his presence towering over the room. "You blocked me from clients, stole my leads, undermined my work," he said, each word like a hammer striking the table. "You assumed I wasn't good enough, not because of my skills, but because I didn't fit your image of success." James swallowed hard. I didn't know." "You didn't know who I was," Derek cut in. "But that's the point, isn't it? You didn't think someone like me, someone who didn't look the part, deserved a chance. And you had no problem making that clear." James shrank under Derek's gaze. Derek turned back to the table of executives. "And you all let it happen." No one spoke. No one moved. He let the silence stretch, let them sit with the weight of their failure. Then, finally, he straightened his suit, his decision made. "You're fired," he said, looking straight at James. James sputtered. "Wait. You heard me. Clear out your desk." James turned to Benson, but the HR manager said nothing, his own fate still uncertain. Derek's gaze swept the room. "This isn't just about him. This entire office needs a reckoning. Changes are coming. You have one chance to prove you belong here. If you can't, you'll be following James out that door." No one dared argue. Derek took a deep breath, letting the moment settle. Then, without another word, he walked out. The news spread through the office like wildfire. By noon, James Coyle's desk was empty, a cardboard box of his belongings sitting by the front door as he made his final, humiliated exit. Kendra, the receptionist, avoided eye contact with everyone, typing furiously as if she could erase the past week through sheer force. Mark Benson, pale and shaken, had been given a private meeting with Derek, not a termination, but a warning. One last chance to prove he could rebuild what he had allowed to rot. The atmosphere in the office shifted, uncertainty thick in the air. Conversations were quieter, glances more cautious. Some employees, the ones who had laughed at Derek or dismissed him entirely, now looked at him with nervous respect. Others, those who had seen what was happening but had been too afraid to speak, carried a different energy, relief, maybe even hope. Derek didn't linger in the aftermath of the reckoning. There was too much work to do. By the following morning, he had sent out a company-wide email detailing the new policies. Diversity and inclusion weren't going to be empty corporate buzzwords anymore. They were going to be policy. Every hiring practice, every promotion, every client lead distribution would be reevaluated. No more glass ceilings disguised as meritocracy. No more backroom favoritism. If you had the talent, you would rise. If you stood in the way of that, you would fall. The first major shift came when Derek called a meeting with the employees who had been overlooked, dismissed, or undermined like he had been. When they entered the conference room, they looked hesitant, unsure why they had been summoned. Most had never even been acknowledged in these spaces before. Derek could see it in their eyes. The expectation of another condescending speech, another thinly veiled excuse for why they weren't advancing. Instead, he smiled. "I want to hear from you," he said, leaning forward. "Tell me what's wrong with this company. And tell me what needs to change." At first, silence. Then, a young woman named Lila cleared her throat. "The mentorship program," she said hesitantly. "It's supposed to help newer employees grow, but it's just a formality. The good mentors only take on people they already know. The rest of us get ignored." Derek nodded. "That changes today." A man from accounting spoke next. "The way opportunities are given out. People like James kept all the good leads for themselves. The rest of us were set up to fail." Derek tapped his pen against the table. "That stops now." One by one, they voiced their frustrations. Some had been working there for years without a single chance at promotion. Others had seen their ideas stolen, their efforts dismissed, their ambitions crushed before they could take root. And for the first time, someone in power was listening. When the meeting ended, Derek didn't just promise change, he implemented it. Within a week, mentorships were reassigned based on performance and merit, not personal connections. The lead distribution system was rebuilt from the ground up, ensuring everyone had a fair shot. And most importantly, an anonymous reporting system was launched, one that went directly to Derek himself. Not everyone was happy about the shift. Some of the old guard employees grumbled, complaining about sensitivity and overcorrection. A few quit outright, unable to thrive in a system where privilege was no longer currency. Derek didn't mourn their departure. What mattered were the ones who stayed, the ones who embraced the change, who deserved to be here. The impact was immediate. Sales numbers climbed as new talent finally got the opportunities they had been denied. Employee morale shifted from weary resignation to something closer, to pride. Clients noticed the change to real diversity. Not just an image, but in leadership brought fresh ideas, stronger deals, and a reputation worth protecting. One afternoon, as Derek walked through the office, he caught a conversation at the coffee machine. "He's the real deal," one employee said to another. "I thought it was all just talk, but he's actually changing things." Derek didn't interrupt. He just smiled and kept walking. Change had come. And it was just the beginning.